Okay, we are rolling. It is Tuesday, September the 3rd, and welcome to week number 5. Seems like you just started this, right? Yeah, because you started it in August, but I told you 5 weeks, 6 weeks ago fast. You know what that means? Next week is it. And so at this point, I just want to say to each of you that I have graded assignments week 1 through 3, and week 4 is due by the end of the week. So I'm starting to work on those right now as I speak. I do want to say this, that I've got more than one occasion where students have reached out to me. It is so important that you follow the rubric in your grade book, and then students have reached out to me and want to know why did they get some points off. I always, if there's a check mark next to it, that means you did everything you needed to do. But if there's a check mark and I should say this, and no comment, that means you did everything. But then if you see a check mark and then you see where I have actually put information in there, you need to read that information, even if it's good information, because sometimes I tell you how to make your papers better, even if you get a perfect score. But I also will tell you if you have not adequate information in the paper. One of the comments that a few students wanted clarified is that when I say that your paper need more citations in the body, I have said this many times, that for all written assignments, citations in the body should be throughout the paper. Now that doesn't mean you have to have a citation for every sentence, or that maybe even just the paragraph, and the paragraph shouldn't be long. But the point of the matter is that citations provide support for the statements. So even if it's paraphrased in your own statement, the source of information that you got to come up with the statement needs to be given in the body as a citation. And it shouldn't be like, for example, I've seen students write papers and they'll have 2-page requirement, for example, and 3-page requirement, and they'll have maybe 1 citation on each page. That's not going to cut it, because that page itself contains information that you discovered from your research, and you need to give credit for that information. And then the other thing that I'm going to say to you is that your references should match. Your references should match the citations. In other words, if you have 3 sources on your reference page and you got just 1 citation, that means there's something wrong. You at least one time throughout the paper, the citations should match what's on the reference page. And also, I have said this, a student asked me, why did I get dinged 8 points right off the bat? It's because the student used Wikipedia. I have gone on record and said from day 1, but if you read the rubric very carefully, which we will go over in a minute, you will see Wikipedia is one of the forbidden resources or sources to use in any written papers. Also, the other thing I want to say while I'm talking about it is a common way that people lose points is by putting references at the end, but not citations in the body. And so it is important that you understand that APA requires, with a few exceptions, generally that you provide citations in the body and, not or, and references at the end. I think if you looked at that academic integrity video that I went over with you at the very beginning of the quarter, you recall that, and that academic integrity video is found under the, let me go and share my screen where we can begin to look at and see what I'm talking about. If you went under the resources tab, let me move this a little bit. Let me see if I can. Yeah. Okay. You see that resources tab, and then if you would click on it just to show you, and you'd see one of the first things on the right is that academic integrity video. So move that over there. Yeah. So you see the academic integrity video, which I'm not going to put on, but you've seen that before. So the point of the matter is, if you look at that again, you will discover why I say citations and references. And then the other thing that create problems is that if the rubric says 3 pages or 2 pages, if it says that you have to have 3 credible resources other than the textbook, and if it says that you use the textbook as your sole resource, which I say here at the very beginning of the course, it's the very first statement I make under additional course information. You are required to conduct research for all papers. That means the sole source cannot be the textbook, and you'll lose 2 points. And so that happens as well. So the key thing is, and then you see it talk about APA, and then a few of you don't put the cover sheet, and you'll lose points for. So I'm just kind of going through my mind some of the most common reasons why people lose points. Not too many of you get these Grammarly hits, because I do remind everybody that you do have a Grammarly account. Once again, you can find that under, go back to it again, the resources, and there it is. And then it tells you how to create an account here as well that you need to use to check your plagiarism. And the plagiarism comes about because we want you to have more critical thinking. And we've discussed critical a bit as the beginning of this course. And as you go through, you're going to actually take a course on critical thinking, but there's actually a video on critical thinking, and it talks about the importance of critical thinking. And so anyway, let me see if I'm trying to hit all this as we go into the lecture for week 5, that mistakes, week 5, as we go through and look at the things that are within the loss of points. But the rubrics are very, very, very important. If you go look at the rubric, and actually I'll show it to you in a minute, but I won't show you in the grade book. The reason why I won't show you in the grade book is because show you in the grade book. Well, let me see. I don't think, no, I can't show you in the grade book because my name is not in the grade book as a student, because because that would affect the percentage. But the grade tells you the rubric, and it gives you each section of rubric, and then there's a section in there, and in that section at the bottom where it provides for not remarks, what is the phrase that's in there? It's under the phone in the room. There's a section in there under each rubric, and it tells you where the comments are, and the comments are right under the comments. It says, I'm drawing a blank, but again, I can't show it to you because it'll be showing somebody's grades, and I don't want to do that. All right. So anyway, it's important that you look at that rubric. All right. So now let's go down, see where we are here. Live lectures. And you see the very last lecture will be next week. Next week at 8:30 p.m. on Tuesday. And you know the rules. And the recordings are found here. After today, you'll see week 5 lecture, which is taking place as what you're in right now. So now let's look at the announcements for this week. So we're going to talk about crimes against moral values. And I submitted to you already previously Chapter 7 of A Brief Introduction to Criminal Law. And then the activities, drug laws, drug driving. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Distracted driving, a little bit about hate crimes. And then for practice, I remind you to do the key terms. And for of drunk driving, and then forced blood draws, and then the practice quiz as well. Remember, your next quiz that counts for a grade will be 6, which is next week. That will cover weeks 4 through 6. Okay, so that means weeks and this week's and next week's material. So you don't really have to worry about 1 to 3 because the exam will actually cover that. And I want to show you going back, just to take you back a little bit, that you see here. Okay, it says this course has 2 graded quizzes. The first one is a mastery of content in the first 3 modules. Okay, that's what I said. So that was last week's, a week before last now. The second quiz of the last 3 modules, that's what I was trying to tell you. And I mentioned that at the beginning of the course. So I was just showing you where we had this discussed earlier in the course. But I'm just reminding you that the quiz that you take will be next week will be 4, 5, and 6 material. So then your discussion post due, which is tonight, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, drunk driving. And you know that the reply post is due Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Okay, and this will be the last Saturday that you will submit anything after this Saturday coming up, which is I think it's the 8th or the 7th. It's the 7th. Okay, so the 7th is the last one. So you're drunk driving. And then I'll show you in a minute on the calendar. Complete the written assignment. Has a hate crime been committed? And you're going to write your paper according to the rubric, which I'm going to again elaborate on and show you as well. Okay, and then we're going to finish strong. And you know what my motto is all about because I shared that with you during the beginning of the course. All right. All right. So now look at the calendar. You see how small that is? This is where we are right this moment. This is where we'll be Saturday. This is where we'll be Sunday. And then the following week, you see 13th. The 13th, Friday the 13th, is the end of this course. Those 5.5, which those who take drugs and crime, many of you are in that course too as well. And so they will end, as well as the 11-week courses that we've had that started previous to your 5.5 courses will be ending on the 13th. So all assignments have to be in. If you try to turn an assignment after 11:59 p.m., it's going to not get graded. The 14th and the 15th. And I inevitably have a student every time to come back and say, you know, I didn't realize that we didn't get that Saturday, Sunday, because assignments are all on Sundays. And I didn't realize the reply post would be due that Friday the 13th, but I thought it would be due the 14th, which is Saturdays the way the rest of them are. You have to listen to what we're saying, because we mean what we say. And actually it's in the syllabus as well, which I'm not going to go back and show you. You can go back and look at it yourself, and you'll see the very last week. So it's very, very, very important that you understand that and pay close to it. So you can give me a paper that's really perfect on the 14th, and it don't mean a thing. All right? Can't grade it. Cannot grade it. And I did. Okay. All right. So now let's go to our module 5. Let's take a look at the assignments. I've already gone over the discussion. So you're going to look at this, and you're going to read the in here, and very interesting fact scenario that's given, and you're going to use that in your initial post to whether the crime of drug or drunk driving committed, and was it by the male, female, or both. And so you're going to explain your positions in your initial post and explain what happened and what would you do with the truck. Okay. And then in your reply post, look at another student's post that might contrast yours and defend your position. It's funny, I'm laughing because almost everybody's posts go one way. And, you know, I'm always involved with submitting a post myself at the beginning, but I have learned, I do that sometimes when I want to get some feedback, but I do know that a lot of times what students will do is they'll see my initial post as a way to say, this is the way I'm supposed to go. It may not be. You can go another way, but you try to explain it, and we'll go with that. And then utilize the guide. We've already talked about that for criminal law as well. And then your written assignment, has a hate crime been committed? And the question is, this is a case scenario is about, as we said, the topic crimes against moral values, and include victimless crimes of drugs and alcohol and abuse, to the more violent hate crimes that are committed against certain classes of people. You know, different LGBT people, people of different races, different religious beliefs, national origin, and so forth and so on. So anyway, this is a 3-part assignment in which you're going to approach it from the view of the police officer, the defense attorney, and the detective. It's funny, I've been in all 3 of those roles in my professional career, and so I know what I'm looking for, and I go through your papers pretty fast. And I will say this to you. Notice what the scenario is, and pay close attention. This is not a 1-part or 2-part or part. I expect you a minimum of 1 page for each part. Did you hear me? Double spaced. If I get single spaced, you're going to lose points. I'm telling you that already, because that from the beginning is what APA requires. It's double spaced, Roman 12. But the point of the matter is it's got to be at least 1 page with the information. And repeating the facts don't help fill that page, because I look at that and consider that. So anyway, you're going to analyze this and apply hate crime laws from the perspective of a police officer in the first scenario. And you're going to write about that. Citations in the body should be for each part that you do. All right, and you're going to deal with these questions. Then number 2, it should be, it says again, a minimum of 1 page. And let me say this to you: don't mix the two. Don't, students write a couple paragraphs or so. They'll write one section, 2 pages, 1 page. That's not going to do it. I'm going to read to see if what I said. Now, what you can do is you can organize it neatly and just put part 1, police officer perspective, and then write what you need to talk. Right, as a head on the page, as a caption on the page, with defense attorney perspective, and you apply the scenario here, and then deal with these questions, and then finally the same thing with part 3. See, each one of them is a minimum of 1 page, and you will lose points for not meeting 1 paragraph or 2 paragraphs, and a page means a page, okay? And I know a page when I see, and so do you. If it's not a page, don't be trying to say, oh, how can I fill it out? If you're adequately addressing the issues properly, you have your appropriate reference citations in the body, and make sure you have your references at the end. All right, don't just and you don't have to have. Don't listen to me. Good. You don't have to have the references at the end of each page, because your reference is going to go on the reference page for the entire paper anyway. All right. So you're going to deal with defining this. By the way, try to stay away from using Webster or simple dictionaries. Use legal materials. You can find there's a lot of law information. There's a law dictionary called Black's Law Dictionary that we use oftentimes, and it's in our library in that online here. And then you're going to deal with these questions. And then it says, if you use your textbook or outside sources to research the elements, include a reference page. Ain't no if in this. Forget this. Forget that if. I don't even like that. It should be a reference page because there needs to be citations, because none of you who are writing these are experts in these areas, including yours truly. Though I know, I'll still use a source that someone has researched to support my position. So APA citation and the formal requirements, and be sure to cite the sources. And then if you need help, again, here's the guides and so forth, and it tells you how to deal with APA, online library. Everything you need is right at your fingertips. So now let's go up and see what the rubric says. First thing it tells you, the assignment information is the due date. Anything submitted after this date will automatically show up in my grade book as late. And for whatever reasons, I will deduct points for that, unless there's some situations that are occurring right now that students are caught in Hurricane Dorian, or dealing with the evacuation, or either working and helping in that. But don't try to do that and you're in Minnesota. Okay? Don't try to do that if you're not in harm's way, because that could get you in big trouble. And then your possible points for a perfect score is this. And so here's the rubric. Once again, you click on it. And that's, you'll see, let me say this. This gives you a chance to see the rubric before you do the assignment. After you do your assignment, you'll see the rubric in your grade book, but then that's after you've turned in your assignment. Now, here's how you'll find it. Each part, for example, forget that misspelling there. We got police officer misspelled. But anyway, the point of the matter is that it tells you what to do, the same thing that you saw earlier. Now, in your before you get to the part 2, there will be a little section that tells you what my comments are, and I forget what they call it. I'm trying to hone in on it as That's why I got my eyes closed, but it's not showing up. But anyway, the key thing is for you to be able to see that, and then you'll be able to know what I'm talking. But it tells you what you did good, tells you what you did bad. And if you did something wrong, like for example that you didn't satisfy the minimum page requirement, then you're going to lose some points for that. All right? And the same thing. So each section, there's a comment. Now, what has happened sometimes with these three-part assignments is I've gone through and read, and all three sections were good. So I'll put a lot of the good comments up here, and then I'll say same as section 1, which means that that's good. Same as section 1 again. So, and then we get down here, I look at the paragraphing, the spelling, and things of that nature. The punctuation. Did you use the right words? Did you use THERE for, you know, there is? Or are you talking about possessive? There, THEIR. I'm going to look and see if you did the right one, okay? And then finally, this is the APA section, which says about the cover page. It talks about the in-text citations, the reference page. It talks about not using sources like Wikipedia as well, all right? So you will see that as well, all right? So you want to make sure that you look at that, because again, don't send me a message saying I didn't see anything. No, that's because you just looked at the rubric. You didn't look under the rubric in the grade book, because it will have. Now, if you don't see anything under that, that means that it was okay. Okay, but just read it. Even read if it's good as well. And that's that assignment. All right, then we come down to the live classroom lecture, and you know that keyword is due also by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And you know for each day it's late, you're going to lose a point. All the way up to 5 days, you get 0. All right, so after that. So that's the assignments for the week. And just a bug flying around here. Sorry about that. If there are any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You could type it in the chat box, or you could reach out to me through any of the means that I've previously established with you from the beginning of this course. I will say this, if it's something urgent, I would recommend that you text me or call me. And if you call me, leave a message, leave your name, which course it is that you're in, and which assignment that you're talking about. And same thing if you text me, because I have students that tell me I have a question about the assignment, and they won't even say their name, and they may not say their name, but I'm a student in the course. Well, I see the phone number. Of course, if you email me, then you know I'm going to see it. So, but the best way to get an answer quick is to text me. Okay. All right. So I'm going to move away from that. Go now into, with the remaining time that we have, the content material. So we're going to talk a little bit about drug laws, a little about drunk and drug driving, distracted driving, and then we're going to conclude with hate crimes. And then I'll take you a minute to show you a little bit about some examples of things that you can use to prepare. You already have gone over these. Okay. So those of you who take the course Drugs and Crime know about this. That we are in a stage of life where we are in an epidemic when it comes to the use of drugs, and I have gone on record and said this over and over again, that drugs and crime go together like salt and pepper, and that oftentimes individuals commit crimes to support their drug habits. And so that's why crime is so rampant, because you have these people that are using all kinds of drugs, opioids, and other kinds of drugs. And so anyway, so what the law is here to do is to attempt to curb the activities of these drugs. And it says that these are laws to consider against moral value, because when you definitely talking about moral value laws, you're kind of basically talking about laws that adversely affect the individual. And so a person who uses drugs is not directly hurting anybody, but indirectly, because they hurt their families, they hurt their ability to provide a livelihood. And then ultimately it extends out to that individual reaching out and then turning it from not just a moral decision, but into a criminal activity in order to get the money to buy drugs. So and so what the law does is it attempts to deal with the morality, but also the key thing is to protect society from the use, because of the negative impact of crime that results. Now, drug laws are intended to protect the individual and also the people around them. And drugs, like anything else that go into the body, you decide you're going to do it, and once you do it, unfortunately, you lose control over deciding when to quit. And it says here, and this is not true, but this is just a comment, it said there are no victims in traditional sense when it comes to drug use, possession, or sale. That's not true. That's not true, especially when it comes to the sale of it, because it provides individuals with the ability to be able to get these drugs, and again promotes them to commit crimes to support their drug habits. And so there are situations where it talks about an innocent bystander caught in a crossfire because a turf war is going on for the distribution and sale of drugs, robbery, and I'd already told you this, commit those crimes not to hurt people, but to get money to buy the drugs. And so we're going to talk about the possession and use and sale of illegal drugs this week, which is part of what we talk about in the course J150, Drugs and Crime, that many of you are well aware of. And so we have this schedule starting from the most severe drugs all the way down to those that are not as severe, but we give examples of drugs. Now, it is very interesting that the definition of a Schedule I drug is high potential for abuse, no currently accepted medical use, and lack of demonstrated safety under medical supervision. It's very interesting that the very last one is marijuana. Now, marijuana kind of has a very interesting format in that Schedule I, it's probably going to leave Schedule I pretty soon, even though we believe quite seriously in law enforcement and in the whole criminal justice system that marijuana is a gateway drug. And when I say a gateway drug, what I'm saying is that it is a drug that opens the floodgates for individuals to move into heroin and other opioids and other types of drugs that damage the mind, the body, and everything else. And so the schedule is created under the in 1970 from the Uniform Controlled Substance Act, and it classifies these drugs. And so, like I said again, this is changing as I speak. Of course, medical marijuana has existed for a little while, but now recreational marijuana is on the rise, and jurisdictions are passing laws to control the distribution and sale of marijuana, including our current state of Illinois, which most recently did it. And there's these houses, there are these smoke houses, vape houses, where individuals are getting a supplementary license to be able to sell and distribute marijuana. And it's going to go along the same lines as selling alcohol, but probably a little more stringent. But anyway, just showing you the signs of the time. And then we get to the Schedule II drugs, which create the real serious epidemic that we're in: oxycodone, fentanyl, opium, and cocaine. And of course, you know about cocaine. One of the things that has created a very serious problem when it comes to cocaine was the advent of the cheap cocaine called crack cocaine, which is manufactured or cooked in a kitchen, just like you fix spaghetti or something. It boils, and you put other chemicals in, and then it turns into a rock form, and then people take that and they ground it up, and they can snort it, and they mix it with other things, and they shoot it up, and anyway, they smoke it, and all kinds of things. And so it gets individuals hooked very quickly. I remember when I was in the academy, and one of the courses that we took pointed out the dangers of using crack cocaine. And what happens is that individuals who use crack cocaine will find themselves in situations where they reach a euphoric high. And so what they do, and this applies to almost all drugs, is that they will next try to repeat that high, which they never get to. And so what they do is they begin to mix it with other things to get to a higher high, and that oftentimes results in overdoses and deaths in terms of dealing with those kinds of things. So we have now some things like Narcan and Noxolone, which arrests or stops the damage that these drugs like heroin and oxycodone can do to the body. Unfortunately, though, is that if you don't get to a person in time, then you can find some real serious. There are some serious effects. This is a book that I have here on my desk. I share this in my Drugs and Crime. Is From Dope to Hope, A Man in Recovery, Tim Ryan. Tim came to our campus in Romeoville, and he shared about his life and using drugs. And he was known as the Hope Dealer, a successful entrepreneur. I'm reading from the back of his book. Grateful, recovering heroin addict, an alcoholic, nationally ranked water skier and truth talking, convicted, and he was a convicted felon. As a business leader in the high-tech industry, he made and lost millions. It's because of his drug use. As a father and a husband, paved the way for his own son's demise, which he talks about that in his book, and he talked about that with us as one of the things. As he, and then as a heroin addict, he's a walking miracle. He overdosed 8 times, people, was pronounced clinically dead 3 times, and suffered 2 minor heart attacks. He's been arrested more than 10 times and served prison time alongside known gang leaders, many of whom became his closest confidants in recovery. And then he was a founder of a Man in Recovery Foundation, and he's a motivational speaker. That's what he came to speak to us about at the Romeoville campus. and its mission is to help one addict at a time transform life from dope to hope. And so this is a very interesting book. It's called From Dope to Hope: A Man in Recovery. Tim Ryan. You can probably find it on Amazon as well. And it's a very detailed story, and it talks about the effects that drugs have on people. Well, anyway, going down, you begin to see how drugs, like the Schedule 3 drugs, look at where we are here, lower potential for abuse, but it leads to a moderate or low psychological dependence. Now, Tylenol with codeine, Suboxone, ketamine, anabolic steroids. And what happens is that they begin to use these and mix them with some of the Schedule 2 or Schedule 1 drugs as well. And then Schedule 4 leads to limited physical or psychological, and that's Xanax, Clopin, Valium, everybody knows about that, and Soma. All right. And then the lower level, Schedule 5, is cough suppressants, medications with codeine. Anything with codeine is something that can be very, very addictive. And so anyway, we talked about this individual about crack cocaine. And so there was developed the war on drugs, which came in the 80s. Like they said, just say no became a slogan, but how many of you recognize and know that saying no is not as easy with drugs as it is with alcohol? And the drug wars are still going on even now, and it's 2019, and it has not, the drug problem not only exists, but it has escalated and very serious. Then it finally says, because the drug problem still persists, many have advocated different approaches, especially with marijuana. I already told you about what's happening with that. And so we started talking about what the statistics are regarding using drugs. So it's a problematic issue. So we get to the possession of controlled substance from a criminal law perspective. There is what we call actual possession, where you have it on your body, and then there's what we call constructive possession. And I've had cases with both of those where I represented individuals as a defense attorney, where a person was found in their car or something like that. And so anyway, the point of the matter is that you could end up still catch a case from possession, because as you should know, a car, usually the driver, not the owner, because the owner may not be around, but if the driver of a car, whoever that is usually the one that's held responsible for those drugs that are even found on other people as well. And so you have various statutes that deal with possession of controlled substance, from knowingly possessing a controlled substance or a controlled substance. And so what's a controlled substance analog? Well, it's similar to the chemicals of Schedule 1 and 2, but these are what we call designer drugs, like spice or K2, which are like marijuana, and therefore they are controlled substances because they can affect the mind, or mind-altering drugs, we should say. And then we started talking about the possession of drugs, and it goes on. So the bottom line here is that the laws are put on the books to try to minimize the distribution and control of drugs, but how many of you know that that's not being very successful, and that it's not changing anything? My position is the best way to change it is to take away the business. And the way you take away the business is not by taking the drugs away and locking the people up, but you taking the drugs of individuals who are customers and getting them help and getting them delivered. In other words, take the market out of the way. And that's kind of in the way that we're moving. If you take the drugs and crime course again, you'll see that. So now let's move into drunk and drugged driving. What is drunk driving? Drunk driving is defined very simply as driving or operating a vehicle under a blood content of 0.08 blood alcohol, which is determined by breathalyzers and things of that nature. Years ago, when I was practicing, the blood alcohol content was 10 BAC, and because many people are killed in drunk driving accidents and situations like that, the law has gotten tougher, and there are organizations that have lobbied, like MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and other organizations that are out here to try to get legislation on the books to give a more severe penalty if you're driving under the influence, or what we call DUIs, and excuse me, or either driving while intoxicated or driving under the influence of drugs, and those kinds of things. So it is illegal per se if you have the blood alcohol content of 0.8. You can lose your license. Your license can be suspended, and almost every jurisdiction now in the United States, I don't know any that don't have 0.8 blood alcohol limit. It has reduced the number of crashes, but education is going to be the key to resolving that point. I'm not talking about going to college. I'm talking about learning and seeing the effects of what drunk driving does. And it says in all 50 states, operating of a vehicle, motor vehicle, number one, upon a highway, road, parking lot, or driveway accessible to the public while impaired. Did you not know you could be sitting in your own driveway under the wheel with it on or off, with or without the keys being in there, but especially if the keys are in the ignition or the keys are in your possession, then you could catch a case for driving under the influence. That's something for you to think about in terms of your assignment that you have for today. And so in most states, you're caught in the situation where basically you shouldn't be under the wheel while drinking. That's the key, or having had a drink. You should have a designated driver. Yours truly, not a drinker, so I don't have that issue and don't have that problem. And so physical control of a vehicle is very simply being in the driver's seat, being in the driver's position of the front seat, or in the driver's position of a streetcar or trackless trolley, and having possession of the vehicle's streetcar, trackless trolley, ignition key, or other ignition device. That's what I was talking about, okay? So that's an intention that you are about to drive. So there's been a lot of injuries or deaths that are caused by individuals who are driving under the influence, and oftentimes charged with homicides, involuntary manslaughter, or voluntary manslaughter, depending on the facts in a particular case. So the key thing is that to prove homicide when a person is intoxicated, you must prove three things: they operated the vehicle, that they were under the influence with a blood alcohol content of, as I said, 0.8, or if the driver is considered impaired. That's what can happen when you are under drugs as well as alcohol or drugs. It's important to note that specific intent is not an element. What that means very simply is that the operation of the vehicle, in other words, the operation of the vehicle itself, not that you intended to, but the operation of a vehicle or being in control upon highway, roadway, driveway, parking lot, and so forth, is a violation of the criminal law. Okay, and then there's some information here. All right, and certain observations to prove impairment. You know, you see this all the time: weaving, driving through a traffic symbol, striking a curb. I've seen that. Other things. Odor, the intoxicants, the smell, blood or red, bloodshot eyes, slurred speech. Now, slurred speech alone doesn't necessarily mean, I've seen people who have strokes and they thought they were driving under the influence, but they were having a stroke. So these are just some observations. That's not conclusive, though. The driver's performance of these field sobriety tests, as they call them, and these are tests that law enforcement administer. I remember we had to do some of these in our classes when we were in the academy. And so anyway, there's a list here of dealing with what police officers and where the drivers have to submit to the chemical test. Do you know if you don't submit to these tests, by the way, you will lose your license, because all states have what we call implied consent laws, which means that you agree that you will be subjected to the test to determine whether or not you're driving under the influence. And if you refuse, you can lose your license, and the penalty can be increased. And so you find yourself without a license. There's a interesting case. You get a chance to Missouri versus McNeely, 2013. Now, before the McNeely decision, when you read it, you'll see what I'm talking about. Law enforcement officers could force a blood draw in a drunk driving case because the scientifically established rapid dissipation of alcohol in a drunk driver was considered an exigent circumstance. In other words, that if they didn't, they could just take it. You know, you don't have to give consent. But the McNeely decision changed that, and today law enforcement officers have to get a warrant to force a blood draw in a drunk driving case, unless some exigent circumstances, that is, require immediate attention, and it better be exigent in order to do so, okay? Because a sharp lawyer will come and get it tossed out. And then dealing with drug driving while under the influence of illicit drugs or the misuse of prescription drugs. Now, there are people who have found themselves taking their double medication inadvertently, and they have been driving under the influence, but that's a mitigating factor in determining what kind of sentence that person gets, all right? And then this is a more about driving while under the influence of drugs, or as they call it, drug recognition experts receive classroom and field training to determine who's drug impaired. And, you know, so, and they're used as experts in court and so forth. And you can look at that there. Okay, so finally deal with distracted driving. You know, you hear it all the time. Texting while driving, using your phone while driving. But distracted driving in itself is anything that takes away from driving. And it says including talking or texting on your phone. Now, hand-free phones are used all the time. In my car, I have put on Bluetooth, and I can talk to a person while driving. Now, I can tell you this. There is still a degree of distraction that can take place while you're doing that, even with hands-free phones. People didn't know that eating and drinking can also, and I'm not talking about alcohol. You know, you see people eating and doing stuff. You know, I see people, especially females, putting on makeup and stuff at the light and stuff like that. Technically, you could get a citation for that. It says talking to people in your vehicle. Well, again, it's hard to monitor those kind of things. So messing with your radio or navigation system. The thing that really amazes me is I'm seeing more and more cars on the dashboard, and they have these GPSs, and I'm looking at them. They look like miniature TVs, and to me, that could be a form of distracted driving, but most jurisdictions allow that. So we talk about teen driving, you know, the highest level of insurance, if you have a car that has insurance, is if you have a teenager. Uh, the highest level is a male. Is because statistically it's been demonstrated that males are more likely to be in accidents as teens than females. That's statistics. It's not discriminatory. So, and then they start talking about distraction, where people are focusing on all kinds of things there. So, the penalties in our state are increased if a driver is involved in a crash that results in great bodily harm, disability, disfigurement, or death, and the violation was the proximate cause of the injury of the death. So if you violate our statute here in Illinois, which basically says that talks about electronic communication devices. Electronic device includes, but is not limited to, a handheld wireless phone, handheld digital assistant, or a portable or mobile computer, but does not include a GPS. And that's what I said. I still have issues with that. That is physically electronically integrated into the motor vehicle. So maybe if it's integrated into the motor vehicle, but it's the same thing. As if, you know, you've seen these mounted ones where people are starting to put them up as well. So anyway, there's a lot of issues that are going to take place, and people are going to be hurt, and then they're going to decide to adjust the law. The last thing we're going to talk about is hate crimes. And hate crimes very simply involve a crime where an individual commits a crime against an individual because of their race, sex, or national origin, or either disability, or things of that nature. And so what it is usually someone will attack those individuals. And when you do that, based upon the federal law and many states now, the crime itself is elevated. Let's say, for example, it might be battery, but if it's determined that it was based on the origin of a hate crime, because it involved the classes of individuals that I just described, then in that case, then it escalates the possible sentence, and it can be more severe in terms of Wisconsin statute prohibits intentionally committing a crime against another, selecting the victim in whole and part because of their beliefs or perception regarding their race, religion, color, disability, sexual orientation, national orientation, or ancestry, whether or not the actor's belief or perception was correct. The point of the matter is that when you start to bring racial hatred, which, by the way, unfortunately, since 2017, racial hate crimes have increased according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And so we have a problem here, people. I'm not going to comment about where I think it's coming from, but many people already know what I would say if I would. And you know, look at how Wisconsin operated. It says that Wisconsin also influenced the creation of statute across the nation regarding criminal enhancement for hate crimes. In the Supreme Court case of in 1993 of Wisconsin versus Mitchell, where Mitchell, who was an African American, was sentenced to 2 additional years in prison for intentionally targeting and instigating a fight against a white victim. Mitchell's intent to target the victim was demonstrated by his words. Basically, he might have used a racial slur. And then it says, he said, "There goes a white boy, go get him." And that puts it in the hate crime category. And so Mitchell tried to argue that the penalty enhanced violated his free speech rights. The court says, nope, that's not true. And you should know this when we talked about free speech, that if it's something pointed toward an individual, directed at an individual to create a disturbance of the peace in that situation, your First Amendment is not going to protect you. Okay? And it says free speech and thought, even vile thoughts, are protected, but they may violate hate crime laws when the thoughts are turned into action, or it's believed that's the motivation. So you get a chance to read this case as well. Okay, and then there's some others. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share with you. I'm going to give you a phrase in a minute, but I want to show you what we went over and how to prepare. We're a few minutes over, but it's worth it for you. We go to key terms again, click on flashcards, and then, if you see something like this, don't do check for updates. Do this, and then allow it, and then it's going to open it up. So it'll give you some flashcards. There's 11, and I'll do just 2 in this one. Occurs in instances where a person has the right or ability to control the item, but it's not on their person. It's called constructive possession. We talked about that earlier. Occurs when a person has physical control over a drug, or typically on their person, and you know what that is. It's actual possession. So you go through each of these, and it's basically summarizing and helping you to prepare for the exam or quiz. So then let's go down to the next one. Next exercise that you can use for practice dealing with drunk driving and forced blood draws. And it provides you with some information that you can check yourself. And let's see, I'm trying to see. Okay, I think this one, is this the one that, no, I thought this was the one that, well, anyway, it tells you just go ahead and read through this and then consider the following scenario, and then there was, because of the rapid dissipation of blood, so forth and so on. Read this case and think about your answer, and then download the document below to see if you're on track. And this is the ideal answer. So you'll go through here and you'll click on this and you'll get the ideal answer for this. That's okay. Yeah, this is a little different. Okay, but it's a good one. Then identify the scheduled drug. You'll click on this, and then it'll take you to another one of those little quizzes, and you start the activity. And then what you do is you can, let me move this over. So you want to match each category with the correct one. Drugs that have acceptable medical use with some restrictions. Is that Schedule 1, 2, or 3? Let's check. The Schedule 2 drugs. And then you do the next one and then attach it. And if you get the wrong one, it's not going to. And then it'll tell you, it'll connect, but then it'll tell you at the end when you submit them all whether they were right or not. So you're going to go ahead and do that. So that helps you to learn that schedule as well, because that's going to come up in your test. Believe me, trust me. You hear my words now, you're going to be hearing them when you take the test. It says, I should have listened. Okay. And then the final thing, all-important practice quiz, which almost mirrors. Some of the questions are directly taken from the quiz. I'm telling you right now. And according to federal law, marijuana is a Schedule what drug with the high potential abuse and no current or accepted medical use, which I told you is being modified. I'm going to ask you, the student who's here, if you can tell me which one. Is it, I'm going to say, is it, okay. And you're right. Absolutely. And then you do the same thing here. Let's do one more. You are a police officer, and you stopped a motor vehicle for speeding. While standing along the open driver's side window, you smell burnt marijuana coming from the vehicle. A search reveals that marijuana is in the center console. The driver says it's not his. You may still take enforcement action because the driver is in what possession of the marijuana? Okay. But if you do that, it's going to be wrong because it's actually constructive. Remember, actual possession is on their person. Remember, it was in the glove compartment. So therefore, it's constructive. It says where a person has the right ability to control the item, but it's not on their person. Okay, great. Now let's do one more. While searching a man who is under arrest for a warrant, you locate a substance that is discovered to be homemade with chemical properties similar to ecstasy. This is considered a what? You are on it. That is exactly right. So that's the kind of stuff. So you see the benefit of why I'm pushing, making sure that you do these tests or quizzes, and that they will affect you. So I am going to give you a phrase, and you need the whole thing. Crimes against moral values. Okay? It's all over the place, okay, here. Crimes against moral values. Don't give me part of it, give me the whole thing. That's how you're going to get your points. And that's what I want you to give me in order to receive. Okay, so with that, I'm going to say good night. I will be telling you if you put that in the Dropbox, and that's an advantage of coming to the live lecture. You can go right to it afterwards, put it in there, and get your points almost before you get it before everybody else sees it, because I have to download it and then it's converted. So I'm going to say good night and see you next week with the final lecture. Oh, you're welcome. Have a good evening, and again, remember, reach out to me if you have any questions. So good night.